I think a lot of Indians value democracy. So if it comes at the cost of sacrificing their democracy, my guess is many would think twice.
I've got big things in store for you today. The world's biggest democracy, the world's largest biometric ID system. Both are helping to reshape the way we think about big data. Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today I'm going big on India. Big elections, big stakes, big technology. Want to know why India has collected the fingerprints and iris scans of more than 1 billion people? Stay tuned. I'll explain. Then I'll sit down with a man who's had an inside look at the money behind the system and get his take on where his country is headed. I'm talking about Raghuram Rajan, former head of India's Reserve Bank. He says his wife will leave him if he goes into politics. He tells me he's thinking about it. And of course, I've got your puppet regime.
Donald, hello. Sorry I did not get back to you sooner. You are enjoying Russia, yes?
Can you help me?
First, a word from the folks who help us keep the lights on. $240 million. That's more than 2/3 of the US population. If you're counting, it's also the number of people living in India without electricity, which is no fun. And that's just the beginning. Many others lack something even more basic, an ID. If you're looking to modernize India, how do you reach all of those people? If tens of millions of your citizens are in the dark and off the grid, how do you provide education, pensions, and healthcare? How do you check credit scores, offer loans, vet job applicants, or collect taxes? India is the world's fastest growing major economy, expanding a full percentage point more quickly than China. But only a fraction of Indian citizens pay income taxes. Actually, only a fraction of every citizenship pays income taxes, but in India it's a small fraction, that's the point. And where do you even begin when an estimated 2 in 5 Indians don't even have a birth certificate? Think about all those potential entrepreneurs, scientists, engineers, and artists trapped in obscurity. If you're a politician, that's an opportunity. Those are votes. So what do? How about designing a system with them in mind? Instead of pressing for reams of paperwork they don't have, how about encouraging them to get their irises and their fingerprints scanned? Then you store that data on government servers and assign each person a 12-digit number that they can use to finally get the services they need. They call it AADHAAR, which in Hindi means foundation or base. And the idea is to cut through the bureaucracy and bring millions of Indians out of the shadows. Thing is, AADHAAR was supposed to be voluntary. Turns out, not so much. Some 22 government welfare programs were created with AADHAAR as a requirement. Some banks even now reject new account holders who don't have it. Opting out isn't much of an option. As a result, more than 1 billion people have signed up. But then something interesting happened. Remember, this is a show about big things. Well, the system got even bigger. India quietly encouraged AADHAAR to also be linked with private transactions, including cell phone contracts, train travel, even social media. A decade after it was first created, the world's largest democracy is now in the throes of a massive data-driven makeover, just as Indians again head to the polls. By the way, you can now use AADHAAR to vote. So what's the problem? Well, those of you who remember your sophomore syllabus should have at least a few questions, say, about George Orwell. I mean, there's the issue of mass surveillance. Do you want the government to have control of that much of your personal data? And even if you trust Prime Minister Modi and he's non-corrupt and the people around him seem to be non-corrupt, that hasn't been true historically for most Indian governments and probably won't be true again in the future. How do you feel about all that data in the hands of that much uncertainty with your government? There's privacy concerns, of course, what they're going to use it for. They've already changed their minds a lot since they've rolled it out. They're probably going to continue. We know in China, facial recognition, use of that kind of data has led to over 1 million Uyghurs in detention camps. Why wouldn't that happen in India? But even if it's used for good, like bringing in new voters and rooting out corruption, systems like these are ripe for abuse. Some 200 government bodies were recently exposed for publishing private data. And one investigative journalist even proved that you can purchase access for up to 1 billion private accounts for less than the price of a sandwich. She paid about $7. To be fair, in Brooklyn, I know some sandwiches that are now more expensive than that, but still, $7. Billion. That's like a foot long right there. But for those who love data, India offers a major opportunity. Are you listening, China? We know you are. There's also another world power out there who may be of even greater concern. Roll tape.
Hi, folks. Ian here with a new game show to help world leaders recognize one another. It's called Who the Hell is That World Leader?
Who the hell is that world leader?
Exactly. First up, this world leader controls more than 1 billion people and has thousands of censorship officials who monitor and determine what those people see, hear, and read every minute of the day. Lawmakers in both Europe and the United States are increasingly worried about his global power. Who the hell is this world leader?
I've been very tough, very strong on China and on that leader right there, Xi Jinping.
Well, that may be, Mr. Trump, but this world leader is Mark Zuckerberg.
So this is what is really interesting, right?
It didn't get any coverage here, but that could have gone very badly.
It's amazing how far you can push all that.
And I'm here at the University of Chicago with Professor Raghuram Rajan, was chief economist of the IMF, was governor of the Reserve Bank of India, and it's really nice to see you again.
Well, thanks for having me.
The scale of everything is extraordinary in India. I remember when Modi was campaigning back in 2014, I mean, one of the big promises was we're going to create an enormous number of jobs.
Yes.
The last time I was there, one of the biggest things that I heard was we haven't seen all these jobs. Why is it, with the high level of growth that you presently have, and actually faster than China now, significantly, why do you think the jobs aren't happening?
Well, one of the big places where China created jobs was construction. And you can see that in the kinds of cities they have, the kinds of infrastructure they have. That's one place where India hasn't done as good a job, in part because being a democracy, it's much harder to acquire land. Now, think about trying to acquire land in the Netherlands. It's going to be very difficult because any highway that you build there is going to run over somebody's backyard. You're going to have a whole lot of groups sort of standing up and saying, not in my backyard. You'll have civil society standing up and saying, why do you want to spoil the environment here? Why do you want to do this here? Why do you want to do that here? That's what we have in India, that you have a very strong civil society, a first world civil society, which stands up whenever there is an attempt to build infrastructure.
So if the problems are principally about internal governance and structure, are you starting to see the average Indian look to China and say, you know what, that system just feels a lot more effective?
I think a lot of Indians value democracy. So if it comes at the cost of sacrificing their democracy, my guess is many would think twice. Now, the way I like to see it is as follows. China had a wonderful system to reach middle income. It was a little more coercive, but maybe that's the way you have to operate. You take the land rather than acquiring it, against the pressures of democracy. You can build a lot of infrastructure very quickly. That gets you to middle income. From middle income to rich is a different sort of ball game. That's when you need creativity, innovation, all those things, where perhaps you need a little more freedom of thought to make mistakes. And I think that
So India is stuck now, China's about to be stuck.
I mean, that's one way of putting it, that China will have to reform its system, in my view, in order to take their country more towards the frontier. I think today there's a lot of angst in the US. Are they going to catch up on us? Are they going to beat us? My sense is, yes, they will narrow the gap, but whatever remains of that gap will become harder to traverse with the kind of system that they have. I think the one-party system is going to become more of a burden for China going forward than it has been so far. It's been quite effective, very effective in many ways thus far. For India, the challenge is to get to middle income. Mm-hmm. Once it gets to middle income, I think it's got the right system to move much faster. But how do we get to middle income? How do we acquire that land, build those highways, build those ports that will give more people jobs and allow them to be more productive? Because eventually we have the system to harness the intellectual power.
I mean, at the high end, of course, I mean, India's education, India's business community is extremely functional. But so many Indians that are still not in the cities, not gaining literacy. Do you see that there's, I mean, despite the unemployment problem, do you see significant progress being made in terms of developing human capital?
Not as much as we should. Even at the high end, we used to have, significantly better universities than, say, China. China now has much better universities than India has, partly because they can put more money into those universities. We had, Jawaharlal Nehru focused on building out universities. We had that before we had, universal primary education. Now we're focusing more on building it right through the system.
Because the stereotype of India is that the central government has money, but you can't actually get it to the people because the layers of bureaucracy at the state level and the local level are so strong that, everyone is taking a piece. No one is getting anything done. How do I reconcile that with the idea that actually the central government is too strong and we need to empower villages and states?
Well, I think we're saying is the same thing in different ways. I mean, a lot of the revenues were collected and flowed to the center, but the flow back into the lower levels of government were more difficult and didn't happen. And every finance commission, which sort of decides how these revenues are spent, has been pushing towards let's get it down to the local level so the local level has more funds to do what it needs to do. I mean, take Mumbai, for example. The mayor of Mumbai has very little power to change the kind of infrastructure that Mumbai has. It's all, powers that lie with the state government or with the central government. So pushing it back to the mayoralty so that the mayor can actually do things that benefit the citizens of Mumbai would be a benefit for Mumbai, and similarly down to every level. Now, today, we have technology which can allow us to bypass those layers of bureaucracy. We have this unique ID across India called AADHAAR.
Which is the universal ID system, the biometric system.
It's a biometric system.
So in principle, you have this universal ID, and it is supposed to allow every Indian citizen to have direct access to benefits.
It is. So you need the ID, you need a bank account, and you need your mobile phone. With these three, you basically have the ability to first get money into your bank account, and second, use it pretty much anywhere, because now that mobile phone allows you to pay pretty much in every store.
And this was rolled out, again, we're talking about over 1 billion people. This was rolled out fairly quickly.
Yes. I mean, the architect of this, NANDAN NILEKANI, who...
from INFOSYS. Yeah.
From INFOSYS,
yes.
Structured it in such a way that it was a platform that was public, that was not owned by anybody, but you could build a lot on it. And India is building out a lot of stuff on it.
Now, number one, there is a privacy question. I remember at the beginning, a lot of this was going to be voluntary, and now it's not.
Yes.
How do you think about that?
Well, there is a serious privacy question. One is keeping your data and all the links to it, to people who need to know and who have your permission to actually see it. And we need to do a better job on that. The Supreme Court has been engaging in trying to understand the limits of privacy, what should be allowed and what should not be allowed, and that's an ongoing debate. My sense is that we don't want the state, which is already very powerful, to have too much power over the individual. At the same time, this offers a way to essentially make many services much more efficient than they are today. For example, the unique ID can become the basis for developing credit information. The unique ID can be a way of transferring so that it doesn't go to ghost entities, but goes to real people. Those are all ways that services can become more efficient.
So go to this election here, and we have now what looks to be a pretty tightly fought contest between the BJP and Modi on the one hand and Rahul Gandhi and the Congress on the other. One interesting point to me is that the Congress party is arguing for the rollout of universal basic income in India, would be the world's largest experiment with that. What do you think about that as a concept and as a practice for India?
First, I think it's not quite the universal basic income that is contemplated in the West, an income sufficient for a middle-class person to sort of live without a job. This is more I would argue, a targeted poverty alleviation scheme. There are a whole bunch of schemes that go to the very poor.
It's the bottom 10% they're talking about, I think, right?
They're talking about around 250 million people, so about a quarter of the population at the end of it, or slightly less than a quarter. The idea here is that there are lots of these poverty alleviation schemes, such as subsidized food. Can we give a direct transfer to those households at the bottom so that they have enough to keep body and soul together, and also avoid problems like malnutrition, like poor health, so that they can actually become functioning members of society and contribute to the workforce. They get a decent education. So the idea, I think, is more poverty alleviation rather than helping the middle class sort of stay at home.
And do you think that that is an appropriate measure? Is it fundable? Do you think it'll make a positive difference if Congress gets in?
I think both sets of parties have been going towards this idea of direct income transfers, of course, facilitated by the AADHAAR unique ID. And the idea there is, look, we have too many poor government services that don't work particularly well, that are inefficient. Is there a way that we can leapfrog by giving the money directly to the poor so that they can command services, whether from the public sector, whether from the government or the private sector, with their money? They have money power. There's a way of empowering at the bottom. And to that extent, I think both parties are going towards the same idea. The Congress, of course, has a larger scheme than the BJP has, but the principle is essentially the same.
And making the central state a little smaller as a consequence.
I think if you wanted to fund it, that would be the eventual outcome.
So next prime minister, whether it's Modi or not, what's the one thing that if you could get them to do that they're not doing right now, that's credible, that's plausible, that's near term, that you wish they'd listen to Raghu on?
Well, two things. Give me two things.
Okay, I'll give you two things. Okay. Sure. If you got two, I was trying to make it easy for you.
No, I just look at land acquisition and make it fair but fast. It has to be
some sort of eminent domain.
No, some way of allowing people to share in the benefits. So I take 5 acres from you, I develop all 5 and give you back 2. So that you have 2 acres now, but of much more developed land. That works because people then have a stake in the future. But it also makes the process of acquisition faster. Things like that, if we could share in growth, make people partners in growth, you could make it much faster.
But allow the government to actually take the land if they need to.
If they need to acquire it, yes.
Okay. That's number one. Number two?
So number 2 is education. India needs to do a far better job on education. We talked about mass education. We have mass education. Kids all enter basic school. They enter primary school. They don't stay. They leave after 5th grade or 6th grade because they simply are not learning enough.
And it's a lot worse for girls.
It's a lot worse for girls. We're changing that. It's getting better. But we need to do far more. We need to have a much more educated workforce at every level. So the other thing I would emphasize is education. Put your smartest minister, your best minister in charge of education.
It's so rare that governments do that.
You know, often it's a parking spot for somebody you don't care very much for.
A Minister of Finance, Minister of Foreign Affairs, right? I mean, Minister of Defense,
Exactly.
but education,
It's a byway. It's dead. And I think it's not. It is the place where our futures will be determined.
If Modi came back and said, you know what, Raghu, you want to be my Minister of Education? You're going to go back? You're going to do it?
Keep asking me questions about my next job.
But this one, where you could make a big difference, most important, young people of India, would you do it?
You know, I'm very happy where I am. If the opportunity arises to do something meaningful, I will always take it up.
See, that's not bad. Now, when you were head of the Reserve Bank, I saw articles that said that you were the sexiest central bank governor in the world.
Well,
That's because it's a low bar, right? Is that what it is?
Zakaria told me the competition was very low. And I think he was right. But actually, you know, I take that back. There's some pretty good-looking central bankers.
Okay, give me your top two. Come on. You just said it. You're on air.
You know, Mark Carney is...
Oh, look at that. Mark Carney, you go for the Canadians.
Is a really dashing central banker.
I'm going to tell you to say that. Okay, number two.
No, I think I just stopped
Just
there.
Mark. Okay. Raghuram Rajan, very good to be with you.
Thank you.
And now for something completely different, I've got your puppet regime.
Mr. Trump, things always seem to be so great for you. So I have to ask, have you ever had a day that was not great?
Well, I'll tell you, Ian, I have. And so not long ago, I had a horrible day, just a tremendously horrible, terrible, bad day. And so what happened was I woke up and I realized that I was locked out of my Twitter and could not remember the password.
Well, now that is breaking news. I mean, it must have been terrible. You were totally defenseless.
Completely, totally defenseless, okay? Failing media all over me, okay? I called the IT department at the White House, and because I canceled everyone's visas, of course, there is no IT department at the White House. And so there was only one place that the newspapers told me I could go where everyone could help. Russia. Just beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful bride. Just beautiful. Wonderful. Probably an 8. Probably. Definitely not an 8. No way she's an 8. This one over here, well, no, a little big for my liking, to be honest with you. I mean, really. Trying to understand how I can find my password here. They told me everyone in Russia is a hacker, okay? Hello. У меня большая проблема.
Какая?
Слушайте, я забыл пароль к Твиттеру. He says it might be president. Let's try.
Our president.
Наш президент.
Our president.
Ваш президент.
And Putin.
And well, he's a very good friend of mine, as you know.
I don't know how you will be remember your password.
You see, she speaks English. I think she's probably a hacker.
In Russia, they can do everything, really.
So could you help me with my
With your phone?
with my password?
Wow.
Yeah. Good. No. Как вас зовут?
Ты провокатор. Ты знаешь, что ты? Ты
He says
провокатор.
Welcome in Russia, Mr. President.
Какая пропаганда? Hello, I'm a big celebrity. Hello, ni hao. China is a big problem. Let's take a selfie, okay? Like that. Is it good? Is it good now? Does it look great? I think it looks beautiful. When you're a star, they just let you do it. Watch it. It's like a magnet, okay? Will you kiss me? Will you kiss? Oh my goodness. Can you believe it? I wish I could tweet about this, but I can't. The But in the end, nobody in Russia could help me. It was very, very bad, and I was in a dark place, about to do something truly, truly terrible. And just then... Who is that?
Donald, hello. Sorry I did not get back to you sooner. You are enjoying Russia, yes?
Can you help me?
With Twitter? Ha! I can't even buy an ad on Facebook these days. You're on your own.
That's our show this week. We'll be back next week. Don't miss it. Please don't miss it. It's so important to me that every week you're watching this show, you're coming back. It's why I'm here. Otherwise, I could vanish. It's existential, actually. But in the meantime, if you like what you've seen, check us out on GZEROmedia.com.